Science Officer Queste of the Star Corp ship Orionsstar rescues and befriends a roguish, charming slave known as Thak. Thak possesses psychic and telekinetic abilities that enables him to survive on primitive worlds with their bizarre predatory beasts and their exotically lethal environments. Under Quest's tutelage, Thak becomes enlightened from the Stone Age knowledge to the Space Age awareness of the coalition of planets and their sole purpose to bring peace and protection throughout the galaxy. Now armed with a newfound hope, can Thak convince the coalition to free his fellow slaves without starting an interplanetary war? Thak's escapades are fraught with anti-bullying themes as he develops a philosophy to cherish life with all its endless possibilities and worthwhile goals. To be content with whatever actions you choose to take, and to never let your values be stripped away. Fate, Hope, and Thak is a science fiction adventure filled with warmth, wit, and humor among its engaging characters. An enjoyably entertaining, infectious space saga. Welcome back for another audiobook review. So today, as I mentioned in the intro, I am reviewing Fate, Hope, and Thak. Narrated by Ben Van Diepen and written by Elizabeth L. Leonardo. So, in one of my previous reviews, I said at the beginning, I'm gonna give you a idea of what this is, what it's about, what kind of people should check it out, and if you want to check it out, whether I think it's worth your time. And I'm going to have to honestly say that this is a book series, this is a book that I think you should check out if you are into science fiction dramas with some adventure. I definitely feel like, if you are into science fiction, you will like this. And you should definitely check it out before you finish this review. If science fiction is not your thing, if you don't like things like Star Wars, Battlestar Galactica, things like that, Babylon 5, this is not a book for you. You would not like this at all, probably. I don't see this getting you into the genre. But if you are a fan of the genre, then this is something you may want to check out. With that said, let's go ahead and dive into the review. So, starting with the cover and title. Now, there are two different covers, which I will show you now. I think the audiobook cover is definitely better than the paperback cover. I think the author at some point may want to consider a few different options. Either pull one of the covers off and put the same cover for both, or take both covers off and come up with a completely new cover once they have their next book written, which I don't know if they do or not yet. But that's going to lead me into the second half of this part. And before I do, I just want to say I'm giving this section, by the way, I'm giving cover and title 4 stars. The audiobook cover, I like this one more, like I said, than the physical cover or the digital cover. But the problem is that the title. And the reason I have an issue, I mean, if this was a simple standalone book, then this would be fine. If there wasn't going to be any more, or there was nowhere for this particular character from this particular story to go, I'd say, okay, this is fine. Because then you could have a series, each with different titles, maybe around different characters that the crew of the Orionsstar come into contact with or spend most of the book. Because this book is written from the perspective of the character Thak. Although, to be completely honest, I'm going to have to say the H's on these fonts for the audiobook covers are a little harder to make out as H's. They kind of look like they could easily be N's, but that's maybe just me. I think it's that line going down, the H's. But moving on, so I will dive deeper into why, but I think the title needs to be different. Now, this is fine as like maybe a subtitle, but I think up where it says science fiction adventure, we should actually have more of a main title. What that could be is completely up to the author, but you'll understand kind of what I'm getting at later on when I get to the story. So I'll touch back on the title there. I just don't want to jump, to something I'm going to talk about in story. I don't want to put that here. So, but I do feel that it needs a actual main title for the series, and this title is fine for this book. So moving on to the narration. Now I'm going to give this narrator 5 stars. With that said, though, he did not do a ton of different voices. He did a couple different voices, and he did very passable accents. So, the accents he did were very passable. Even if one that he did, luckily this was not a main character, because one of the accents he was doing was supposed to be Asian, and every time he voiced this character, I just had to sit back and go, oh my. Which, if you get that joke, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But yes, it reminded me of Sulu from, well, he does it in Big Bang Theory a lot. Every time he guest stars on the show. But I don't actually recall him doing that in Star Trek at all. So I don't know why that's like his thing. But moving on to the writing. Now, for the writing, I'm going to give this 5 stars. It was written really well, and a lot of the stuff that was brought up was very well handled. You didn't get overbogged with technical details. Uh, Everything was simple, easy to follow. There was only like one or two times things were called something from something else, which I'll get more into when I get to story. But unless the author had made up their own words, which honestly they could have. They could have invented like so much of their own stuff with this. And I just feel like, that would have benefited this book and this series maybe a little bit more. But now that so much of this stuff has been set, they have to keep it that way. They can't change it. So, but as far as writing goes, the writing was spot on. So 5 stars for writing. Now moving on to the usual longest part of these reviews, the story. And for the story, I'm so drawn on what I actually want to score this. Because part of this is a 3. And another part of this is 4. And I'm just not sure if I want to give it a 3 or a 4. Because the story itself. Okay, I'll give it a 4. But I'll tell you basically everything. And yes, if you do not want to spoil this, then you should stop right here. Go check it out for yourself. Last warning. But the story was more about adapting a character and setting up this crew. And some of the things like that you weren't supposed to like, I think should have gotten a little bit more attention. Like, this main character has to deal with this therapist. And the therapist is supposed to be a bad person trying to use the main character. And you don't find that out till some point near the end of the book. But aside from very few interactions, you really don't hear a lot about him dealing with that particular character. You only have like maybe 1 or 2 previous interactions where, they basically just keep repeating that this character's bored with this part or angry with this part, uncomfortable. And it's like, okay, but it would have been nice to actually see some build up. With Dolores Umbridge, J.K. makes you despise her throughout the course of the book. And I felt like that could have been done here with the therapist making more frequent. And that's just, an example of one thing. There's not as much action as you might think. And basically, I think part of that is because, it's about this character trying to fit in with this crew. Secretly hatching his own plans to do his own thing where he can basically bend the rules the way a certain other character from another series would do, So, I'm just going to come right out and say this. I mentioned at the beginning that if you are a fan of Star Trek or Battlestar Galactica or Babylon 5, you would like this book. And that is because this book heavily, very, very heavily mirrors Star Trek itself. And I mean original Star Trek. Now, I can't say it's a copy. It could be an homage. But as you are listening or reading this book, you will definitely feel, you can tell that the author is a huge fan of Star Trek, and that's why I was so torn on a 3 or a 4. Because a lot of times people say, oh, keep trying to keep adding into worlds that are already established. If you want to do that, make up your own world. And this works just fine. It's very similar to Star Trek. Even the crew is very similar to Star Trek. I can definitely feel the author has a love for Star Trek. And instead of trying to make a carbon copy, they tried to make it their own in little ways. And to the author, I'm just going to say this right now. If you really, really, really want to push away from Star Trek, maybe have some space battles. Starfighters. I know this is an exploration ship, but you could maybe have a few starfighters on board and have them attacked or something. That's what I kept hoping for. And the end of this book, the end of this story, does set up for a sequel. So going back to the title, now the reason why I said what I said about this needing a main title is because this sounds like it's trying to be a series. Something like Star Trek, or Battlestar, or Babylon 5. It could be the Orionsstar Chronicles, or the Orionsstar Saga, or something. It has potential, but I definitely did feel a strong play of Star Trek going on to the point where some of the characters mirrored, which I'll get into in a minute, but yeah. I just feel like, the thing with Star Trek is Star Trek doesn't have actual starfighters. Not like Star Wars has. Not like Babylon 5 has, or Battlestar Galactica has. And this story feels like very much Star Trek. Now, if you had Star Trek with starfighters, that would be interesting because I have not seen that done yet. I don't know. I mean, there's so much you can do with that, But, moving on. Now we get to characters. And since I already talked about in my previous, I'm going to have to say that the characters, I'm going to have to give this 5 stars. Although I will say this dangerously comes close to 4 stars, but I'm going to give it the 5 stars since I already talked about the Star Trek thing. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because not only did the story itself feel very Star Trek-y, which I am a fan of Star Trek. I have watched all Next Gen, all Deep Space Nine, all Voyager, all the original movies from 1 up to, what was the last one eye. Well, Nemesis for original timeline. And then I've seen the 3 that came out with the Kelvin timeline, which I absolutely hate the Kelvin timeline, so I think that whole thing is stupid. Even though it's, I guess, canon because, it had Spock in it. But we're talking about characters. Going back to characters. This isn't a video about Star Trek. Sorry, and that's kind of how the book feels. It's like, wait a minute, am I listening to Star Trek or an audiobook? But yeah, you have several characters on this ship who feel almost like carbon copies of characters from the original Star Trek, to the point where they talk like that person or they make comments like that person. Like, I think the roles could have been mixed up a little bit. There is a Spock-like character. If the Spock-like character had been like the Doctor, and the first officer had been like McCoy, that would have been a nice little change. He still could have had, and it's like the Spock-like character has green blood, things like that. It could have been changed. It was a little too on the nose. But did I like these characters? Well, yeah, because they reminded me of characters I already knew. So I did like these characters. Now, thankfully there wasn't a Russian, but there was an Irishman. And we did have a Scottish man. So, and there was an Asian, and that's why I made the comment earlier about, the oh my. Because the few times he talks, it sounds just like Sulu. I don't think I could say that enough in this review. So, yeah. There really wasn't any extras. I mean, in audiobooks, when I like putting this section just in case somebody out there surprises me. And there are a few audiobooks that do have this, where you either have sound effects or multiple people in the audiobook doing the voices, and you can tell it's like a man and a woman team, I like that kind of stuff because it sounds more realistic. Like I said back during the narration, he could do some voices, but some of these voice actors, can only do so much with their voice. And he was one that, unfortunately, he only had like a handful of different voices to pull from. Although he could do really good accents, I mean, the tone of the voice always didn't change very much for me. So, when I look at extras, those are what I'm listening for. Musical cues, sound effects, multiple voices. But there was, unfortunately, none of that here, which is kind of a shame because I felt like that could have spiced up this audiobook just a tad, But again, we didn't even get any space battles, like I said, so I kept thinking that this was going to have a space battle, like, there's going to be some, like, people following them or something, trying to find that main guy, but no. So, moving on to the final verdict. And after much deliberation and much decisions, I've decided to give this audiobook for Fate, Hope, and Thak a 7 out of 10. I think it's very fair. I think this series could get better as it goes on. I think this can grow into something big. I definitely would look forward to the next one to see how much it improves. Because, I mean, this book was a perfect setup for the next one. Unfortunately, that's all it really seemed like, is that this was set up for something bigger. This was on the tad slow side for me. You know, I'm used to listening to things like Star Wars, where you actually have some space battles, lightsaber battles, things like that, and you didn't really get a lot of any of that really here. I mean, there was no space battles. There was not even really, fights. I mean, like big fights, like fights to the death. There was like sparring, a little wrestle between shipmates, but nothing absolutely huge, where you want to see the hero take down the big bad. And I just think that, something like that in the future could, do better. If there's something like that in the future of this franchise. And that's what I also feel it needs too. It needs a name. I don't know if she wants to reach out to her fans to name her series. That would be up to her. But I definitely feel like this needs a name for the entire series if she's going to move forward. So that has been my review for Fate, Hope, and Thak, written by Elizabeth L. Leonardo and read by Ben Van Diepen. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. If not, I'm terribly sorry. If I messed up on any of the names, I'm so sorry. Like I said, though, even though I gave this a 7 out of 10, I really did enjoy it. And I know naming a series is one of the hardest things to do. But you need a tie that's going to tie your series together. And there are plenty of people who have videos up on YouTube on ideas on how to name a franchise or a series. If you're writing a series, if you would like me to make a video where I take all that knowledge and I give you guys the best ideas, feel free to let me know that's what you want down below. When I'll be happy to make that work. I want to thank you all so much for watching this review. If you have not, please go on Amazon, check this book out, and while you're there, why not check out one of my books, like my book series, The Guardian of Light, an epic fantasy series set in modern day that has some characters that everybody's gonna know. I think you'll all enjoy it. Most people who have actually read my book tend to enjoy it. Well, I've had several people that I've loaned the book to, and they loan it to someone else, and then they come to me saying, hey, can I get the next book? Because this person borrowed it, and now they can't stop reading it. I had that happen at work the other day, so... like I said, yeah, if you like fantasy, and you want to check out a really good fantasy novel, a really good fantasy series, check out The Guardian of Light. Once again, I want to thank you all for watching, and if you have not, please consider subscribing to this channel. Make sure to click that notification bell so you're notified the second a new video goes up, and I will talk to you all next time.